Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka has taken a violent turn. Muslims, Christians and even some Buddhists are worried. This is a conversation that's already underway online. Our digital producer Malika Bilal, she's tapping into it. What is going on? What are people saying?
Yeah, so people are already talking about it. We're listening to those conversations and hearing some interesting things. On the one hand, you have people saying that these attacks have been blown out of proportion. Crimson Tide tweets in, moderates outnumber hardliners on all fronts. Contrary to what he says, Western media says. He gets pushback. Someone responds to him on Twitter using our hashtag, Campaign for Justice, says, we want to think that there are more moderates, but each time minorities get attacked, we asked, where are they? We're going to talk about that during today's show. We can't do it without you. Use hashtag AJStream.
You know, Malika, the weekend I kept on getting questions about how do I get onto the stream? How do I get to be a person on the stream? I said, look at my laptop, stream.aljazeera.com/story, and there, so you click on this red button here, you record a video, you allow the little widget to record you, and you too can have a question or a comment and be in the stream like this community member.
My name is Tasima Tala. I'm a human rights activist and I'm in the stream.
So as Sri Lanka fights allegations of past war crimes, it's present-day sectarian tensions that have religious minorities concerned. Buddhist monks have attacked dozens of mosques and churches in the last year. The attacks reflect the hardline nationalism that has taken root since President Rajapaksa's Sinhalese government crushed a rebellion by ethnic Tamils almost 5 years ago. A group called Bodhu Bala Sena is one of the most prominent nationalist organisations. Its mix of religion and politics concerns many. Now, in this atmosphere, it has moved Sri Lanka's second largest monastic order to ban its monks from political activities. So, is Buddhism in Sri Lanka under threat from religious minorities or from within its own ranks? To help us talk about this, in Colombo we have Delanta Vitanage. He is an executive member and coordinator of Bodhu Bala Sena, that's a Sri Lankan Buddhist nationalist group. In Colombo, Muhammad Hisham is a spokesman for Rally for Unity, that's a collective campaign against hate in Sri Lanka. In New York, Palitha Kahona is Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations. And in the United Kingdom, Mahinda Degale is a religious scholar and teacher at Bath Spa University. Gentlemen, it is great to have you all here in the stream. Welcome to you all. I'm going to start with Hisham first of all. If you have this anti-hate campaign in Sri Lanka, can you tell us the kind of ways that hate is actually bubbling up in Sri Lanka, the kind of attacks that you've seen and you've heard about?
Yes, I'm going to start with a disclaimer that although I happen to be a co-spokesperson for the Rally for Unity group, for the benefit of the people who are listening to this, I think I'm going to take a little bit away from that role alone and talk more like a patriotic Sri Lankan citizen who loves the country and who wants the country to go the right way, so that I don't have a lot of attachments or the limitations of representing an organizational viewpoint, because I myself have been an activist on this area for a while.
All right.
On your question alone, I have to just say initially, like I have already mentioned numerous times, the majority of peace-loving Buddhists they don't deserve this kind of a negative connotation attached to Sri Lankan Buddhists in general, because I myself have grown up in the South and I've been with people and of all faiths, and I don't think that's fair enough. And this is more of if I just try to put it into 3 simple points, it's just about a particular group, a minority, a powerful minority trying to normalize hate. They try to create this under the pretext of safeguarding the so-called traditional Muslims, Buddhists and Christians and Hindus, and assuming there is some non-extensional threat to Sri Lanka being a mono-ethnic Buddhist, Sinhala Buddhist country. So that is the first concern I've got.
All right, so Hisham, I hear your context, but you're not telling me about any attacks or anything that's happening. Should I assume that nothing's happening?
If you assume nothing's happening, I think it's not fair, because
all right, so just share with us what actually is happening then.
Right. I mean, there are two ways of things. One is the widespread hate speech, which has normalized hate. And for example, the organization our colleague Dilanta represents, they have been talking on stage on hate speech, including about why Muslims should not be part of the system, and wearing a hijab is a problem, and Muslim women giving birth to children being a problem, and all these things on public stages and without being questioned by any authority on hate speech or whatever. That's on one side. And then there are other fringe groups who, because BBS has always been, I had to give credit where it deserves, and they have been claiming that they never profess violence, and that has never been proven directly. So, but there are all these fringe groups. Quite coincidentally, as soon as such a remark or a statement made by their officials,
right,
attack maybe a business establishment according to history, or go on rampage into the mosque or a church, or even after such statement in Dambulla, even a Kali Amman Kovil, for example. I'm not the law enforcement person to join these dots together and say, okay, they don't profess violence and somebody else did it. But
all right,
who does it and motivates?
Take a breath for a moment, because you mentioned fringe groups, and you also mentioned BBS, which is also the group that we mentioned earlier, which is Bodhu Bala Sena. We have a member of that group with us. You're shaking your head as Hisham is talking. Is he getting the full picture of what's happening in Sri Lanka? You're both in the same city right now.
Partly true, I believe. I think we have to add certain points to this. One thing that in your conversation you mentioned that Mahinda Rajapaksa president Sinhala government. I don't think that is correct, because if you look at Sri Lanka, the Colombo, the capital city of Colombo, the mayor of Colombo is a Muslim, and the governor of the Western province, the leading province of the government, the country, is a Muslim. And if you look at ministries, a large number of ministries also occupied by Muslim people and Tamil people. So therefore, I don't think that Rajapaksa government, I don't want to protect him or anybody, but it's not a Sinhala government, it's a Sri Lankan government. That's the first point I would like to say. And the second couple of points that as Western media and some media promoted, Bodhu Bala Sena never involved in attacks or violent activities. And he was mentioning that we are attacking hijab. We never. I would like to tell you that I have posted some post on the website also, your website also, as comments. So we were commenting on face closing clothes, but we never wanted to talk about what we call traditional Muslim dress, which we used to have in our friends' mothers and sisters using. So we don't have any problem. So I think some words, now for example, we don't worry about whether Muslim women have 4 children or 5 children, but we were telling people, Sinhalese people should have more children in our families, because some NGOs purposely focusing on Sinhala majority,
right,
they want to reduce Sinhala people. So they introduce certain programs called Small Families Good. So
okay,
we
Dilanta,
want to have some programs.
Dilanta, some of our community actually want to ask you questions as well, so I'm going to open up the conversation so they can get into the conversation as well. So hold tight for a moment.
Right, well, he was referencing, allegations of population control, which I have seen online, but I want to give this some context. So Mahinda, on Facebook, someone wrote to us saying that I am both a proud Sri Lankan and a proud Muslim. Her name is Lasantha. The vast majority of Sinhalese people are peace-loving and do not discriminate or have hateful opinions. However, she does go on to send us this, saying there is a certain fact that hate campaign has started on the internet, and it then took to the streets. The only way to stop it, she says, is to ban hate speech. So others are talking about this so-called hate campaign. I pulled up this tweet. Angry Tamil Bird, he calls himself, points the finger at, he says, Buddhist supremacy politics. Can you take us into what people are calling these supremacy politics? Is that occurring?
I think the organization that we are discussing about, the Bodhu Bala Sena is only one, Buddhist groups who are protesting, and there are several other groups. I think it is important to look at how Bodhu Bala Sena itself sees itself, and as I see it, I think there is a history for this organization. Until the end of the 2012, it was more concerned about purification within Buddhism, renewal within Buddhism. And I think starting from January 2013, I think it kind of went on discussing about this halal certification, idea that Muslim can have halal, but it should not be imposed on non-Buddhist and non-Muslim. So I think from that on, I think Bodhu Bala Sena got a bad reputation as extremist group. But I think there are many areas I think we should talk about this organization, what it intended to do.
I'm going to show our audience some of the pictures of the attacks that have been happening in the last year on mosques, on churches, because when we said we were going to do this subject, our online community, they were incredulous that Buddhist monks would actually go and attack other places of worship. Palitha, who do you think is actually doing this?
Let me set the record straight slightly.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the way you introduced this topic has set the tone. It creates the impression that Sri Lanka is a place where intolerance is rampant, where minorities are not being tolerated, etc. It's absolutely contrary to what actually is going on in that country. Sri Lanka has been a tolerant society compared to many other societies around the world for thousands of years. It didn't happen yesterday. It did not happen because of a resolution somewhere in the United Nations. It happened because we are intrinsically a tolerant society. Minorities and the majority have coexisted for thousands of years. That's the first point I would like to make. And secondly, I would like to agree with an earlier speaker who said that Mahinda Rajapaksa's government is not a Sinhala Buddhist government. It is a government of all the people. Our justice minister, a cabinet minister, is a Muslim. And Muslims are everywhere in our community. If they are being persecuted, they're being discriminated against, why do they live in almost every Sri Lankan village, in every Sri Lankan town? Like in every other society, take for example in Britain or the United States, there are small groups, individuals who do not fit the norm, who are not accommodating. We may have groups like that too, but they are a minority. They're not the majority. If they were the majority, I do not think we'll be having this conversation today. Sri Lanka is a tolerant society, and I must also emphasize that under our constitution, the right to free speech, right to profess a religion of one's choice, and to behave in the way one wishes to, including by wearing the hijab or anything else, is protected. So let us get this record straight. And I must emphasize that Sri Lanka is getting the type of attention from the international media, especially the Western media, that it does not deserve.
All right, which is why we love the fact that we have 4 Sri Lankans in the conversation, and Hisham is dying to join that conversation. Hisham, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to what Ambassador Kohana was mentioning. I mean, I'm not refusing what he said. I am no way saying that Muslims are persecuted in Sri Lanka, like Myanmar, for example, which Dilanta is just back from. But I'm glad that he mentioned about Article 9, 10 and 14 of our Constitution, which gives this freedom of speech and freedom of religion and everything. But my concern has been, I agree with the whole point which the Ambassador was trying to highlight, but the only concern has been, as the Foreign Affairs Minister very recently, less than a week ago, mentioned, according to his statistics which he quoted, there were 77 incidents and 22 have been concluded, 55 are still to be sorted for the last 4 years, according to what he said. But there are other communities, like National Christian Evangelical Alliance has 125 incidents. I'm not talking about mosques being destroyed or churches being destroyed. I'm talking about incidents of hate. 125. The Secretariat for Muslim talks about close to 100 in the last 6 months. But my question has been, I always have been, while being in Sri Lanka, asking, why is it that law enforcement authorities are not making it very clear that what kind of action they have taken, and why is it taking such a long time to prosecute figureheads of this hate-mongering organization? I mean, I know it's not that majority of Sri Lankans are racist or whatever. I was very clear when I started. I'm not saying Muslims are persecuted.
Right, Palitha,
I think Hisham is making a very valid point. Let me respond to that first. there have been prosecutions. As he acknowledges, there have been 20-odd prosecutions. There have been also cases which have been resolved amicably, where the community has stepped in and brought the two sides together, and peace prevails. The incident that is most talked about is the incident in the fort, where a Muslim mosque next to a sacred bow tree was the cause of friction between the two communities. That incident, although it could have led to bigger, much greater violence, was resolved very amicably. There have been many cases which have been resolved in that fashion. So what I'm trying to say is that
how was it resolved amicably? What was the end?
Let me finish, Hisham. The community leaders get together and try and work these things out. That is how we have worked things out in our villages, in our towns, for centuries. I mean, this is nothing new. When things go out of control, of course, like in the 20-odd cases that my minister mentioned, prosecutions have been made, and including of Buddhist monks. So it's unfair and wrong to say that the law enforcement authorities have not been active. They have been active, but the focus, the emphasis is on resolving these disputes in a manner that both sides can accept and will enable both sides to live together in the future as well.
Okay, let me just jump back into the community. Malika.
Well, Palitha said that there have been prosecutions and officials have been active. Online, our community is not so sure. They're not convinced. Mike Gabriel says, I think the main reason that we're seeing these attacks is the implicit approval, he says, that's granted to these radical sects, quote unquote, by those in power. Dinata, I want to pose this next Facebook comment to you because someone online has a theory. Jas Warren says, what's fueling this is nationalism and the fear of being taken over by a foreign religion. Is that true? Is there a fear that you think that Buddhism is under threat?
Yes, definitely. Buddhism is under threat, and it was under threat. You know, Sri Lanka was a very peaceful country before British and other people came and massacred, and they destroyed Buddhist temples. And even today in the East, you are not talking about, or you talk about only attacking churches and mosques. But I have photographs here. So where some of the mosques, some of the Buddhist temples, which has history of something like 1,000 years, bulldozed in the East. So I think media should talk about those also. But anyway, what we are trying to say that Sri Lanka Buddhism is under threat. One particular reason, because Sri Lanka is violent in a particular, although we have peace, loving people, but at the same time there are some elements who are violent also, because we were under British colonial system, and they introduced divide and rule policy. As a result of that, the society is divided, and we had to go through unnecessary war for 30 years. Then the society has certain elements of violence. So of course that is there, but at the same time you have to understand that there are a lot of unethical conversions happening in Sri Lanka. Now, for example, we have a large number of Sri Lankan women. So as an organization, we don't want women to go and work in Middle East, but there are a large number of women working there. Over 80,000 women converted into Islam. And at the same time, there are a large number of NGOs working in Sri Lanka. Not all NGOs are bad, but they are focusing on converting Sri Lankan Buddhists who are poor, who have no material support.
Delanta, let me just make sure that I understand you really, really fully here. So let's say approximately 70% of Sri Lankans are actually Buddhists. Have I got that about right?
No,
roughly. It depends on who's counting. It could be much more.
Okay, so about 70%.
Yeah.
So 70% of Sri Lankans feel that they're under threat because they're being converted. Is that what you're saying? I just want everybody to be very, very clear.
Not only that. You have to understand. Conversion is one thing.
Okay, so conversion is one. And what is the other threat when you as Buddhists are the majority? Just make it very clear for our international audience, not in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. Now, if you look at most of structures of the government, education, and all are right according to the structures built by British. Although we got independence, but we are still in that trap. And the other main issue is within Sri Lankan context, we can say Sinhalese Buddhists are the majority. But we have, not like in 50 years ago, we have global forces working, global funds, global media, global politics, global religious forces working there. As a result of that, we say that Sri Lankan Buddhists are a minority within the global context. So we are you all talk about global forces, global environment. So within that, so we cannot understand how funding coming from Saudi Arabia for Wahhabism.
So we hear, I'm hearing a lot of different things here. I'm hearing some threat that you're feeling from the Muslim community, some threat you're feeling from the Jewish community, some very long ago history from the former British Empire. So Ambassador, how do you create an integrated society if some Sri Lankans are feeling that they as a majority are under threat?
Don't forget that we are a democracy. Like in any democracy, there are bound to be different views, and some of which may be conflicting with each other. Sri Lanka is no different in that respect. Take this country, the United States, as an example. How many different religious views do you have here? How many of them agree with each other? We are no different. But what I started off by saying that the government of Sri Lanka is coming under a focus that is unfair and unjust. It is not as if we are the worst in respect to treating our minorities in a way that's not acceptable. So is the argument that there might be worse places, so we shouldn't look at what's happening in Sri Lanka?
I'm not saying that you should be. I'm not saying that you should be looking at them. I'm simply suggesting that your focus in Sri Lanka overemphasizes whatever is going on in Sri Lanka.
Let me just ask
Sri Lanka, by and large, is a very peaceful.
Because he's sitting in Sri Lanka right now. Overemphasis, is this a conversation that you don't want to have in public, Hisham?
Not necessarily, because I just wanted to, if you may give me a few seconds, with all due respect to what Ambassador Kohane mentioned about amicable settlement, about the Grand Pass Mosque issue. I mean, I do acknowledge that aspect, but even if you see the situation today, what I'm trying to highlight is the kind of the seemingly lackluster response by the law enforcement. Even today, that extended part of the mosque, the boat tree was cut to enable the mosque to be expanded. The UDA still hasn't cleared as far as this morning, as far as I was here.
Hisham, we're coming very quickly to the end of the program. I'm hearing everybody saying this is not how most Sri Lankans are. I understand that. So what do you want then as a member of the minority in Sri Lanka? What's an ideal situation for you?
There are just two things I want. I want my motherland, my country to be, I should be able to be proud as a Sri Lankan citizen saying that regardless of faith, of the faith I follow, that I have my rights to respected, but it's not like what has happened in Rajagiri, Janadipati Balika, for example, when a girl was asked to remove the Punjabi.
All right, and the second thing, because we're right at the end of this part of the program, Hisham, what's the second thing you want?
The second thing is, I mean, even though there are claims and counterclaims about how much of action and prosecutions are done, it's nothing visible, and people have their doubts about the whole situation. So all I would like to see is, regardless of whether it's a mosque, church, or a kovil, if somebody has done something wrong, prosecute them, regardless how they are connected or how much they are connected or how much power they have.
All right. Okay. So I'll leave the last word with the community, because this conversation has got a lot more energy in it, and we'll take that to the post show. But Malika.
It definitely has. Well, Twitter kind of exploded when one of our guests, Dilanta, said that Buddhists are under threat. We got a lot of tweets that look like this. Sam says they're not under threat. Muslims and Christians are a significant minority. They pose no threat towards Sri Lanka's Buddhist culture. Another person writes in about only 5 Muslims representatives out of 67 members in the cabinet. So I want to leave off with this from Iftikhar, who says Buddhist monks enjoy privilege from the state, as it's the religion that is recognized and enshrined in the Constitution.
To be continued at stream.aljazeera.com. Just a moment though to tell you about our next program. How are the Paralympics going on right now in Sochi, Russia, changing the way that people see disabilities? We'll be joined by a group of Paralympic athletes for their take. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. And if you can't get online right now, you can catch us on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Online Post Show. Today we're discussing the rise of hardline Buddhism in Sri Lanka, so let's get right back to the conversation. All of our guests have pushed back to our actual conversation, but you're hearing the conversation, so I know you feel that it is important. Let me go back to Delanta. Delanta, our online community are really curious about how it is that with a majority of Buddhists in Sri Lanka, you still feel under threat. Could you just break that down a little bit more for us in very simple terms?
Definitely, because now he was mentioning about the halal issue. Now, for example, in Sri Lanka, 90% people, Hindu, Christian and Buddhist, so around 70% Buddhist. Now, for last 6 years, people were not aware that in Sri Lanka there is something called halal, but secretly, in a very strategic manner, halal food was introduced to Sri Lanka. So we never said that we should stop Muslim people getting halal food. But what we were saying is that Buddhists should boycott halal, because people, when they say that we are against halal meat. You have to understand that in Sri Lanka we had a problem last year when we go to shops. Halal yogurt, halal water bottles, halal spices, halal chili powder, halal paintbrush, halal toothbrush, halal toothpaste, everything halal. And one of my friend who is a businessman, he had to pay something like 4 lakhs rupees, something like $4,000 per annum to get halal certification. And at the same time, we got some information from Canada, from a research agency, that some of the money from Canadian halal agency going to Hamas and Al Qaeda. So because of that, we think that the way how some of these halal certification, Sharia law, all this introduced our country, Sharia banking.
So let me just ask, just to be very direct, did you want halal to be banned?
No, we never asked, but unfortunately the media, because the Muslim politicians and some of the organizations, religious organizations, they want to get funding from Middle East countries. Then they promoted that.
You said the media wants to get funding from Middle East countries?
No, I mean some political organizations and religious organizations, they want to get funding for Muslims from Middle East countries. Therefore they promoted that we are fighting against halal, and we are saying that halal should be banned. We never, as an organization, we never said that.
I'm going to just move on just very briefly here, because we have a lot to pack in. Hisham has been raising his eyebrows so many times. We will get back to you, Hisham, because he's not quite on the same page as you, but we'll visit the community before we get back to Hisham.
Well, Mahinda, just before we enter into the post show, people were pushing back against the idea that Buddhism is under threat. And I ended with this tweet that I want to bring up again from Iftikhar. He says that Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka enjoy privilege from the state, as it's the religion that's recognized and enshrined in the Constitution. So since it is in the Constitution, as someone, of course, who studies this for a living, can you talk to us about why the idea that the threat is there and whether or not it's justified?
I think, Buddhist majority feel that they are threatened by certain groups, and actually they are fear of military groups. Earlier people were afraid of the LTT, and now post-war period they are more concerned about armed groups in other areas. And also I think this is a situation where historically Sri Lankan Buddhists feel that this is the oldest living Buddhist tradition, and as Sinhalese we have a duty to protect it. And also after the post-war there is a relative peace in Sri Lanka, and so the Buddhist groups have been able to reflect upon what they have doing, and so they see the malpractices within Buddhists themselves, and also, as Delanta mentioned, like issue of conversions and so on. So I think they are combined together. They feel like a little bit insecurity, and I think what is important is I think we have to take these claims and to do a very good scientific study to verify these things. It's very important, because I think people will not have these responses if there is no some kind of misunderstanding or reasons. I think it's very important to ask why these misconceptions arise and what is the ground reality, and whether we could do anything rather than saying that there is a conflict between majority and minority. But how can we resolve these issues amicably? With discussion, using the political process, in a democratic manner. So maybe interfaith conferences, right, or kind of meet with the support of the government. And I always stop here, but if you have more on constitution, I'm happy to answer.
Sure. Ambassador, this is it really does hand over to you there, because we're just in the closing moments of this particular program. I'm not sure scientific study or conference will help the situation in Sri Lanka right now. Is there a political solution?
Yeah, no. I think I would again like to focus on a different aspect of this.
We're wrapping up, so this is your closing thoughts.
Very, very quickly. I would simply like to remind everyone that this is a country where the minorities and the majority lived very comfortably with each other for centuries.
Ambassador, we're revisiting old territory, so give us something fresh. Where do you think the government should be going with this conversation? Because in reality, there is some tension, even if it's the minority.
I think the emphasis now in the media on attacks on mosques or churches, as was mentioned, on temples in the Eastern Province, need to be de-emphasized. We need to get on with each other, as we have in the past. The Muslims in the country, when they were oppressed by the Portuguese, fled to the center of the country and sought protection from the King of Kandy, who was a Buddhist. And this is the type of environment we need to restore in this country. Not live in an environment of suspicion and persecution. We are a tolerant people. We get on with each other. We should set an example to the rest of the world.
All right, I appreciate ending on a positive note from the ambassador there. I want to thank the guests, Mahinda Degale, Mohammed Hisham, Delante, and Ambassador Pilitha Kohona. It's great to have you all here in the stream. Thank you very much. Now we just have time to take a look at some of the other stories that Malika is following on the stream.
The disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 has captured the attention of social media users worldwide. Hashtag Pray for MH370 has been used more than 800,000 times since the plane disappeared en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Around the world, thousands expressed solidarity with vigils and messages of support for the 239 passengers and crew on board. Well, the search for the missing airplane is still underway. We turn now to Japan, where thousands of anti-nuclear protesters took to the streets of Tokyo to mark the third anniversary of the Fukushima disaster. Sharing protest images, many called for an end to nuclear power. And using slogans like "Goodbye nukes" and "No nukes," they vowed to stop the government from restarting idled reactors. Lastly, in Sweden, hashtag Kämpa Showen, or Showen Fight, is trending after an activist was allegedly attacked by members of the fascist Swedes party. Showen, a Malmo football club fan and the founder of Football Supporters Against Homophobia, was injured after attending an International Women's Day event. The Malmo football team showed their support for Showen as demonstrators on Sunday condemned the attacks and fascist parties. Police are investigating, and Showen remains in the hospital as support for his recovery grows. We want to thank our community for pitching today's leads. If you have a story you want to see, let us know on Twitter at hashtag AJStream.
Thank you very much, Malika Bilal. So, on the next program, how are the Paralympics changing the way people see disabilities? We'll be joined by a group of Paralympic athletes for their take. Until then, we'll see you online. Thanks for watching.